Welcome to this video lecture for the textbook Understanding Project Management, A Practical Guide, 2nd edition. This is Chapter 4, Scope Planning. So let's get started. As usual, here's the project life cycle as a reminder, and we can see the 4 phases, and we can see that Chapter 4 is within the planning phase, scope planning. And just a quick reminder that these chapters, the sequential nature of these chapters is not meant to suggest that planning is done sequentially like this, that first you do stakeholder, then you do scope planning, then you do schedule, then you do budget. They're in real life projects, they're mixed together, that one area affects the other. So on any given day, you might be doing 2 or 3 of these, but it is more back and forth across these planning areas as you actually plan a real life project. So that's just a reminder. Okay, so their agenda for today with scope planning is really to answer 2 questions. What do the project stakeholders need? And what will the project produce? So let's answer these 2 questions. First of all, in the first one, what do the project stakeholders need? So the first order of business to define the project scope is to determine the needs or requirements of the project stakeholders. And this is why it's important. We talked about in Chapter 3 that it's important to understand who your project stakeholders are. You can't get their requirements if you haven't identified them and know what they're about. So that's why it's so important to do that. Now, requirements may be gathered in a number of different ways. And it depends on the characteristics of the project, the number of stakeholders, and many factors such as that. But here's a few ideas. One is that you can interact with the stakeholders directly through the interview process, which may be a meeting, a phone call, a video meeting, emails, messages going back and forth, and so on. So it's a mixture of all these things. But the idea is that you interact directly with stakeholders. And this is one of the most common ways that requirements are gathered, but not the only. If there are a large number of stakeholders, if they're the customers, which there might be hundreds, thousands, or more customers, you may use surveys to gather information and then help you determine the requirements based on the results of the surveys. You can do research in terms of customer trends, demographics, as well as researching what other projects have done in the past or competitors have done, and so on. That all comes under the banner of research. You can also perform focus groups. Again, if you have a large number of people or stakeholders that you need to get input from, it may be more appropriate to run 1 or more focus groups. So these are various ways you can collect the requirements. The bottom line is that you're gaining this information in order to plan for the scope. Now, as usual, we're going to review the ongoing case study from the textbook by watching the following video. So in this video, we'll see the next steps that the project manager takes in order to gather the project requirements. So let's watch this.
Sophie sits at her desk and considers the recent project kickoff meeting. While there were a few tough questions from the head of the software development division, it all went well. Picking up the project charter document, she scans the objectives for the project. She turns off the ringer on her phone to prevent any interruptions. Sophie refreshes her memory by looking at the objectives. Based on the business case for the project, a full product launch is required, including the support of the sales process, an update of DecoCam's website information, social media promotion, trade show materials, and the development of a promotional video. While this is a good start, Sophie knows that these are high-level objectives. That is, the requirements for each of these objectives need additional detail in order for the scope of the project to be defined. The project has been approved with a $60,000 budget, so Sophie knows that the requirements need to fit within this budget amount. In order to determine the project requirements, Sophie will need to bring a new member into her project team, a business analyst. After negotiating with a couple of senior managers within the company, Sophie secures Fatijit Kumar for a period of time. Fatijit was one of the company's first employees and has worked in both the administrative and marketing areas of the company. He has recently moved into a business analyst position, and his in-depth knowledge of the company has been very useful during recent projects. Fatijit meets with a number of individuals within the product development and marketing departments in order to understand their needs. He also reviews the approaches that were taken when similar products were launched, while also checking to see the impact the approaches had on the subsequent sales activity. Fatijit documents this information in the project requirements document.
Okay, so we saw the work that was done by the project manager, as well as a new role that was defined. So let's debrief this a little bit as to what happened. So we saw that the project manager reviewed the project charter and business case. It's important that the project scope is based upon the direction provided in these two documents. They are very much directional in nature, and therefore the project scope should acknowledge and follow the parameters set forth in those documents. So she reviewed those. Because there's a lot more work that's going to happen at this point beyond both perhaps the time and specialty of the project manager, a business analyst is brought on board in the project. Now, business analyst is a term for this type of role. There are other types of project role descriptions and so on that may be used in other organizations. But this person, in this case, Fatijit, is going to take the lead in terms of defining requirements. So we see that he primarily uses interviews with key stakeholders. You saw the meetings that were set up and so on in the video to gather requirements, though he also researches past product launch projects. So we saw that happening. You can see the completed project requirements document for the case study in the textbook. So please check chapter 4 and you'll find that on page 46. And you'll see that it is very factual in nature. It describes what the stakeholders require. It's often divided into different categories of requirements, but it's looked at, this is the total list of the things that the stakeholders are asking for. It's not necessarily everything the project is going to do, but the first step is to find out, well, what is required by your stakeholder group. So we can see the key idea there at the bottom: gather the project requirements from the project stakeholders. So now we shift gears into, now what will the project produce? Based on those requirements, what will be defined? What work needs to be completed by the project? This consists of two main processes and resulting documents: the project scope statement and the work breakdown structure. And we're going to cover these two processes and documents in detail now for the rest of this video. So again, let's go back to our case study video, and we'll see the next step in terms of creating the project scope statement. So let's watch this together.
As Sophie reflects on her planning up to this point, she is feeling more confident since she has a good handle on both the needs of the project stakeholders and the project requirements. Yet the more she thinks about the next steps, the more she feels uneasy. Sophie's natural tendency is to want to get going on the project rather than writing down the details. However, during some of her recent projects, this approach has caused problems later on. One or more of the following would usually take place. Even though the details were discussed with the project sponsor and other stakeholders, memories of the discussion and decisions would fade over time. There were often disagreements about what was or was not to be included in the project. Team members working on the project were often confused about what they were meant to produce. Small details were missed, causing a number of last-minute emergencies. Verifying the quality of the completed deliverables was difficult, as the team members were not sure what they should be looking for. So, for this project, Sophie decides to create a detailed project scope statement. Together with Fattyjet, she refers to the project requirements document as they begin to define the various deliverables that will be created during the project. They frequently need to communicate with many of the stakeholders in order to determine the characteristics of each deliverable. They are also constantly aware of their overall budget and project due date. In addition, there are a number of possible deliverables that are defined as not being in the scope of their project. For example, while the project requirements document included a requirement to update DecoCam printed material, it was decided that it would be more effective for the corporate promotions department to perform this task. To ensure this decision is documented, Fattyjet adds it to the project exclusion section of the project scope statement.
Okay, so now we saw the next step taking place is now the development of the project scope statement. When defining the scope of the project, we're now seeing, throughout that video, we're seeing the scope converted from requirements to actual deliverables that will be included in the scope of the project. And that definition of deliverables is a key point of scope planning. Deliverables are chunks of work, of chunks of things that you are going to produce that, if you collect up all the deliverables, make up the overall scope of the project. So this is something that that is key in the scope planning, the transformation of requirements to deliverables. Deliverables are based on the requirements that were gathered, but sometimes not all the requirements may be addressed due to project constraints such as budget and time and so on. We may not have the time or budget to be able to complete all of the requirements. And that's one of the challenges of scope planning. The deliverables should be documented in the project scope statement. Again, you can find the completed project scope statement for this project in chapter 4. You'll find it on page 50. And in there, you can see the various deliverables that Fattyjet and Sophie defined. This was based on their documentation of the requirements, and won't list. You can see them on page 50 and 51, but a few of them, there's updates to the website. There's a press release which needs to be created. There's a promotional video that needs to be created. There's also a multimedia demo and a variety of others. There's a number of deliverables. They're defined in the project scope statement and described as to their characteristics. This is now the direction to the project team. The project scope statement is a key directional project in document, that defines the characteristics that are to be done. They're the specifications, if you will, that describe what it is that we need to create, and it needs to be as detailed as we can, as we know of at this point. There may be some details that we will be able to more fully discover during later planning and during the executing phase, but we should strive to define it as clearly as possible. So again, the key concept: create a project scope statement that describes the project deliverables to be included and not included in the scope of the project. Ensure this document is signed off by the appropriate stakeholders. So a few things just to note in that key idea is that the project scope statement documents both what the deliverables to be included, but also anything that is not going to be included. So it's meant to be very clear. There may be some requirements that the project stakeholders just assume are going to be part of the project, and if they're not, they should be included in the exclusions area of the project scope statement. And the document should be accepted and signed off by the project sponsor, as well as any other required stakeholders, but certainly by the project sponsor. There may be other supporting documents. There are often other documents that do not fit easily into the structure of a project scope statement. A project scope statement is normally done in a Microsoft Word or similar product. And there's types of information that don't fit well into a Word document. In that case, the project scope statement would then refer to these documents, would be kind of like an index that would say, as well as C documents, A, B, and C, and they would be considered to be appended to the project's scope statement. So for discussion, for you to think about, what are the other types of documents that would potentially not fit into a project scope statement? And so if you think about that, and just to give you a few ideas, there might be perhaps architectural drawings, there might be design software, sort of CAD sort of software or similar, that just does not lend itself well to Microsoft Word, but the scope statement would still know about those and would refer to it and say, see architectural drawing, dated, this date, for example, that it is officially part of the scope of the project. So it's important to understand what the project scope is, and that's what a scope statement documents. So again, key concepts: supporting documents that describe the scope of the project may be appended to the project scope statement in order to more fully describe the project scope. So we shouldn't think of the project scope as a single document. It may be a collection of documents, and the project scope statement is the index to them. It's the one that points you to the other ones as well, if there are other documents. Okay, now the second document we described, there was the project scope statement, and then there is the work breakdown structure, or WBS. So this is an important planning document that is really kind of fundamental to the planning process. And so while the project scope statement describes the characteristics of each deliverable, the work breakdown structure, or WBS for short, organizes the deliverables into a hierarchy, as shown here. So this is a typical way of demonstrating a WBS. Oftentimes they're in tree diagrams like this, and you can see at the top of the structure of the WBS is the project itself in that sort of orange color. And then the project itself is divided into multiple deliverables. You can see 1, 2, and 3. So you think of that as the project itself in orange is broken down into 3 deliverables: the pink, the green, and the bluish teal. So that's called decomposing the project, or breaking it down. So those 3, the 1, 2, and 3 is equal to the project. It's just the project divided into 3, logical deliverables. However, sometimes we want to break those down further. So the orange 1 dot deliverable, or sorry, not orange, the pink 1 dot deliverable, if it can be broken further into sub-deliverables, 1.1 and 1.2. Likewise, the green 2.2 deliverable, maybe in this case, is broken down into 3 sub-deliverables: 2.1, 2.2, and 2.3, and so on. You can see that for the third deliverable on the right side. Now, in terms of terminology, these are all of the colored boxes of the pink, the green, and teal. They are all deliverables at various levels. They're just, in some cases, broken down further into sub-deliverables. But you can see that, when you look at a WBS, for example, 1.1 and 1.2 are really equal to 1. They are just deliverable 1 broken down into smaller detail, right? So that's the decomposition process. Now, there's special terminology. A deliverable at the lowest level of the WBS that is not broken down any further is called a work package. So there are certain deliverables, and you can see here, there are 7 of them in this example that are deliverables and work packages because they're not decomposed further. Now, I just talked about there's levels within a WBS, and that's important terminology. For example, the very top of the WBS is level 1. That is the project. That's the whole thing. Okay. Level 2 is the next level down, where we take level 1 and break it, in this case, into 3 chunks. And then level 3 is where we take each of the deliverables in level 2 and break them down further. So that's a way we can point at various points in the WBS and refer to as at level 1, level 2, level 3. This is a 3-level WBS, work breakdown structure, because it's broken down into the 3rd level. So that's just some terminology. Now, the work breakdown structure can also be displayed. This is a tree diagram, which is useful from a presentation point of view. It very much demonstrates the work breakdown structure very, very graphically, but it's difficult to create and maintain. You know, oftentimes WBSs are updated frequently, and you'd have to be dealing in some kind of graphic software to create this in PowerPoint or Visio, or you'd have to be dealing with graphics, which becomes especially if you have a large number of deliverables, a large project, this becomes very awkward to work with. So another way to demonstrate, this is in effect the same work breakdown structure that we just saw over on the previous slide, or back to the previous slide, is displayed in a list format. And this is very simple to create in a software like Microsoft Word, for example, or Excel. You can create this very simply and insert. If you need to update or create more deliverables, it's very easy to insert more rows. But it's very important to note, this is the same WBS that we just saw on the previous slide. And again, here's level 1, the overall project. There's level 2, right? The first level of breakdown. And there's level 3, the next level of breakdown. So it's equivalent to the previous. And this is the way most project managers will work with a work breakdown structure through a project. They will not necessarily struggle with a graphical work breakdown structure on an ongoing basis. It's more for presentation purposes. Okay, here is now the video for creating the work breakdown structure. So now let's see what happens in our ongoing case study. So let's watch this together.
With the project scope statement underway, the planning team, Sophie and Fatihjet, turn their attention to organizing the project. A number of deliverables have already been defined, but the question now becomes how to organize the project. Scanning the list of deliverables, they decide that the project itself may be organized into 3 main deliverables: trade show support, communications, and the promotional video. Each of the deliverables from the project scope statement is inserted under one of the 3 deliverables. Because of the size and complexity of the promotional video deliverable, Sophie and Fatihjet decide to break it down into 2 smaller deliverables: video plan and video production. As they put the finishing touch on the WBS, Sophie feels a sense of relief. The product launch is large and complex, and she wasn't quite sure where to start. But by organizing the project into a hierarchy of deliverables, she can now focus on the completion of 9 manageable work packages.
Okay, so we just saw the work breakdown structure process in action. So let's talk about that now in more detail. So based on the work underway in the project scope statement, so based on that work defined, Sophie and Fatihjet decide that there are 3 main categories of work. So they looked at the deliverables that are defined in the project scope statement. And this is part of the design of a work breakdown structures. They said, okay, there's some of these that are based on support of the trade show. Remember, this is a product launch. So there's a bunch of things that we have to do, deliverables related to the trade show. So we'll make that one category. There's a bunch of things that we need to do for the communications aspect. So we'll make that into the communications category. And then finally, there's the promotional video, which is sort of a separate thing. So they said, okay, that's our categories. In effect, this is level 2. Remember, the project itself is level 1. This is level 2, the breakdown into major categories of work. And then they break each of these main categories into even smaller chunks of work, which we saw in the video. So the resulting is as follows. This is the case. This is the work breakdown structure that they came up with. Now, many of these you'll recognize from the project scope statement. In fact, the WBS needs to agree with the project scope statement. If there's something in the scope statement that is not represented here, this would be a problem. So we can see that there are those, the level 2 that was defined. So these chunks of work are called deliverables, right? And we saw that Sophie and Fatijit said, okay, there's trade show support, communications, and promotional videos. Those are 3 deliverables. And so that was done, level 2. Then each of those were broken down into smaller deliverables. And, a lot of these were coming from the scope statement as well. So you can see the communications, press release, media outreach, social media, website updates. So we're now organizing them in our structure. Likewise, the trade show support, trade show signage, the booth giveaways, and multimedia demo. That they were all defined in the scope statement as well. Now, as was described in the video, the promotional video seemed rather large. And so as part of the work breakdown structure process, the decision was made by Fatijit and Sophie to break it down into further deliverables, even though the scope statement didn't break it down that far. So they broke it down into video plan and video production, right? So into a 3rd level. And again, a reminder that when a deliverable is not broken down any further, it is also called a work package, right? So in this work breakdown structure, we have a number of work packages. And if we count them up, we have 1.1 to 1.3 is 3. Then there's 4 more under communications, so that's 7. And then under promotional video, we have 2 more, so that's 9. So there are 9. Let me just count those again. So 4, 3 is 7, 8, 9. There are 9 work packages. And so the name of the game now is that in this project, if you complete the 9 work packages, you've in effect completed the project, right? So that's important. Okay, some ideas on creating a work breakdown structure. Well, what are the various approaches that may be used to create a work breakdown structure? How do you do this? The video showed sort of some of the thinking, but it didn't get too specific about it. Well, the textbook describes various approaches. So I encourage you to see page 55 of the textbook. There's various approaches. There's top-down, there's bottom-up, and a few others. But that's something to, check that out in the textbook. That'll describe more information about how you do it. So there's a process to do that. Sometimes it becomes unclear as to, well, when do you stop breaking down deliverables into smaller deliverables? Like when do you stop? When do you know that you're at a work package and you don't need to go any further? Well, again, there's no absolute rules on that, but there are things that you should think about, and those are described on page 56 of the textbook. So please have a look at that, and you will see, well, how fine do you need to go? How far do you go in keeping, creating, in effect, new levels in your textbook, in your WBS? Is it 3 levels? Is it 5 levels? Is it 10 levels? Well, that's something that you need to think about, and that's described on page 56 of the textbook. So the overall key concept is to create a work breakdown structure that organizes the deliverables of the project into a hierarchy. Now, WBS is an important document because it organizes the deliverables into a structure. It's a way often it is used when you're creating a budget. It often mirrors the structure of the work breakdown structure. You can also assign responsibility to certain sections of the WBS to different people or teams on your project. So you may say that you have a certain person or team that's responsible for the communications deliverable. And they're responsible for all work packages in that deliverable, as an example. Or you may assign a certain work package to a person or team as well. So it allows for the project to be seen as a collection of deliverables, which allows you to then manage it more effectively. So the creation of a work breakdown structure is a key step in the planning process, and so it should be done very carefully and thoughtfully. The key terminology that was introduced in this chapter is there, and for more information and the definitions, please see the key terminology section in chapter 4 of the textbook for a complete list of key terms and the definitions. Some references for some of the graphics in this PowerPoint, and that is the video lecture for chapter 4.